Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series of this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from the Commander Masters Precons, Zhulodok Void Gorger. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck text, gifts, and more. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Zhulodok is a 7/4 eldrazi for 5 generic and 1 colorless. It gives colorless spells we cast from our hand with mana value 7 or more double cascade. This means that whenever we cast such a spell, it cascades, then cascades again. This ability in and of itself is quite busted, and for anyone who has played with other cascading commanders before, you already know how satisfying it is. However, don't feel tempted to run as many high mana value cards in your deck as you can. The deck still needs to function and be able to work. A good balance is necessary. This is why I organized my deck list on Mox Field with tags and in ascending order of mana value, since that's such an important aspect of a card when being considered here. I built the deck very multidimensional. There's a lot going on, but a lot of it meshes together. So let's first showcase some of the big spells that have some use, and then we can see how to make the most of our commander's double cascade boon by synergizing it with the triple core of all commander decks. First up we have Ancient Stone Idol and Emrakul the Promised End. These two beaters are included because they will almost never cost their entire cost to cast. If anyone swung a small army into us, we might even cast Ancient Stone Idol for free. Or if we sent a handful of creatures, then Ancient Stone Idol would cost less. And since it has a mana value of 10, it will double cascade. As for Emrakul, the deck has at least one of each card type, yes, even Tribal in Battle. So, believe it or not, Spaghetti Mom can cost as little as 4 mana to cast depending on our graveyard. Casting this for just 4 mana is not that common though, but so satisfying when pulled off. Artisan of Kozilek costs 9 mana to cast, which is great at getting the double cascade trigger. It's a bit costly as a reanimation piece, but consider that as a bonus, especially since a 10/9 with Annihilator 2, which could be backbreaking when cast early enough. Void Winnower is a 9 mana stacks piece, but once it hits, players will scramble attempt to get rid of it, especially since most board wipes have an even mana value. Being an 11/9 is also relevant. Getting this out early can be quite cumbersome for your opponents. It That Betrays costs a whopping 12 mana to cast, so more often than not, you won't be cascading into this anytime soon. But its 12 mana value aside, it has Annihilator 2, and whenever an opponent sacrifices a permanent, you gain control of it. There are a handful of cards in the deck with Annihilator. While this is already an incredibly punishing mechanic, we're also stealing opponents' things, which is even more punishing. Annihilator and Thievery can also be considered a form of interaction. We just don't really control what's getting sacrificed. But no matter, having opponents sacrifice a bunch of things each combat will eventually leave them without a board to play with and potentially give us the win via scooping. So let's see the rest of the deck's interaction then while we're at it. Demolition Field and Field of Ruin are great because they don't take up a slot in the deck. Sure, we have to sacrifice them in order to hit those pesky lands in the format, but at least we're getting a basic land back for it, so it's not so bad. And lands in the graveyard help casting Emrakul. Speaking of getting lands, Myriad Landscape, Wayfarer's Bauble, Navigation Orb, Burnished Heart, Solemn Simulacrum, Staff of Titania, Sword of the Animist, Bitter Thorn, Mrs. Animus, and Sword of Hearth and Home help with that. The first 4 need to be sacrificed to work, but that's okay. More things in the graveyard to help cast Emrakul. And best of all, the land doesn't take up a slot in the deck. Solemn Simulacrum ramps when it enters the battlefield, which is okay at 4 generic. Then, when it dies, we draw a card. The last 4 are dependent on combat, which shouldn't be a problem in this deck. As a bonus, Staff of Titania pumps the equipped creature for each forest we control, which is great because those are the tokens it creates. Nissa's equipment are just as good since they also trigger on attacking, unlike Sword of Hearth and Home, which triggers on combat damage. However, this sword also gives +2/+2 and protection from 2 relevant colors, so you'll more than likely get that trigger. If that weren't enough, it can blink one of our creatures. Solemn Simulacrum comes to mind. All these effects are great since the deck is running 9 wastes. Thanks Oath to the Gatewatch for finally giving colorless commander decks access to fetchable lands. Not to be outdone, Rumbreaker the Invasion Tree and Oblivion Sower also ramp us while being disruptive effects. For 2 in tapping, an opponent mills 3 cards and then we can put a land from their graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. Combined with the previously mentioned land breaking lands, we can do some nasty things with this. Unfortunately, the deck isn't running any Praetors to make the most of his second ability. That being said, if you want it to be spicy, you could also include Masked with Nexus if you wanted to. My deck isn't running solely Eldrazi cards, but Masked with Nexus would also make all creatures Eldrazi to make further use of those creature type dependent cards. I'm not running it like I said, but it'd be pretty epic to pull off. Oblivion Sower unfortunately won't double cascade when cast, but at least it exiles the top 4 cards of an opponent's library, and then you can take any land cards from their exile. This might seem a bit niche in terms of a slot in the deck, but graveyard hate does exist in the game, so this actually happens more than you'd expect. It's also still exiling the top 4 cards of that opponent's library. That being said, if you wanted a flex slot in my deck, this could be one. The deck is also running Warping Will and Not of This World, which are amazing because no one expects non-blue decks to run counterspells, especially colorless ones. And you'd be remiss not to run these. Warping Will counters every sorcery speed board wipe that isn't Supreme Verdict. It also has 2 other modes, but I've only ever really used it as a counterspell. Not of This World can even be cast for free if it's to protect a creature with 7 or more power, a creature such as our commander. Not only that, but since its mana value is 7, it would also have double cascade. So not only are we protecting our commander or other huge threat, but we get to double cascade off a 7 CMC spell for free. Kozilek the Great Distortion can also be used as counter magic at the cost of discarding spells with the same mana value. Not only that, but it's a great beater at 12/12 with Menace. Plus, it draws us cards and double cascades when cast if we control our commander. Absolutely busted. Titan's Presence, Duplicate, and Portal to Phyrexia provide some more interaction but against creatures. Of these, only the Portal will double cascade, but they're still strong cards to include, especially the Portal. Not only for its enter the battlefield trigger, but its reanimation effect that can seal from graveyards too. Introduction to Annihilation, Invasion of Ravnica, Scour from Existence, Meteor Golem, Spine of Ishsaw, Cityscape Leveler, Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, and Ulamog the Infinite Gyre do it slightly better though, since these can hit almost anything. Well, Scour from Existence and Spine of Ishsaw can hit anything, since they also hit lands while also double cascading. While it might seem like having removal pieces at such a high mana value is a bad thing, keep in mind that our options are somewhat limited and we are hitting almost anything. Plus, the last 4 double cascade. As a bonus, the Leveler triggers each time it attacks too. Both Ulamogs have removal on their cast trigger but also have attack triggers. Ceaseless Hunger exiles the top 20 cards of defending player's library, while Infinite Gyre has Annihilator. They're also indestructible 10/10s, which is nothing to scoff at. Oh, and the last one prevents us from getting milled so long as it's not exiled along with our graveyard while its trigger is on the stack. Those original Eldrazi Titans were too good. If we attack into our siege, transforming it into Guildpact Paragon, it's totally useless to us since all of our spells are colorless. However, once it's a creature, it can eventually die, once more being a battle while in the graveyard, to make Emrakul cost even less to cast. Silver lining, people, silver linings. Karn Liberated and Ugin the Spirit Dragon can also hit almost anything repeatedly, which is great. And they both double cascade when cast if we control our commander. Karn can exile absolutely anything, while Ugin can only exile non-lands since lands are colorless. That being said, with enough loyalty, Ugin has the potential of exiling away most things on the board, which is epic since he hits none of our things. His +2 is also good since it hits almost all utility creatures in the format. His ultimate is pretty good, but not the point of running Ugin. Same with Karn's ultimate. Resetting the game is a benefit in the most niches of situations. In any case, Karn is to single exile things, and Ugin is mostly for wiping the board. Speaking of wiping the board, Steel Hellkite, Navinaral's Disc, and All Is Dust help with just that. Steel Hellkite needs to connect, and then you have to pay mana, but it's still an amazing creature card here. The only downside is being 1 mana value away from double cascading. Navinaral's Disc is a great way to maintain a cold war with the table, where you can just push the button whenever it's most convenient for you. All Is Dust is the absolute all-star here though. You double cascade, and then when it resolves, you keep all of your permanents, while everyone else won't keep everything. It's also that tribal card to help lessen Emrakul's casting cost. Bane of Balaged and Kozilek Butcher of Truth are absolute monsters to resolve, and not just because of the double cascade. Whenever they attack, they will get rid of things on the board. First one exiles, while Kozilek's Annihilator goes great with the previously mentioned It That Betrays. Oh, and their stats are also worth mentioning too, with Kozilek drawing us 4 on cast as an amazing bonus. It also prevents us from being milled so long as it's not exiled while the trigger is on the stack along with our graveyard. Arcane Lighthouse, Detection Tower, and Shadow Spear help us deal with creatures with pesky abilities like Hexproof, Shroud, and or Indestructible. Last thing we need is having interaction and not being able to use it on things that need getting rid of. The first 2 don't take up slots for being lands, and Shadow Spear is already such an amazing equipment on its own. Not only does it help us deal with annoying creatures, but it also gives Trample and Lifelink. Both are amazing keywords when this is attached to such a huge target like the things we have in our deck. Gaining life is important when the deck has a slow start. Tomb of the Spirit Dragon also helps in that respect by gaining us life equal to the amount of colorless creatures we control. It might not seem like much at first, but it doesn't take up a slot in the deck. As for protection against opponents' own things, we have Platinum Angel and Platinum Empyrean, both of which will double cascade upon casting if we control our commander. These Pillow Fort type effects essentially prevent us from losing the game. That might seem like a bit of overkill, but this commander has the potential of being kill on sight, as well as you being a potential arch enemy once the deck starts rolling. Speaking of, Commander's Plate, Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, and Mithril Coat are included to not only protect creatures like these, but also our commander. Don't underestimate the power of good protective effects when you have a 6 CMC commander that boosts your deck once it's in play. Homeward Path and Plaza of Heroes also help. The former retrieves anything that could get stolen, while the latter gives straight up hexproof and indestructible. Fortunately, it already has a colorless mana tapping ability, otherwise its other mana ability will not give any color because colorless is not a color. Akroma's Memorial also helps protect our creatures by giving them protection from black and red, two colors heavy with removal and burn effects. However, it also gives our creatures flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, and haste, which is quite the keyword soup for the monsters already in the deck. Speaking of boons and monsters, Eldrazi Conscription might seem like overkill, but not every creature in the deck is a monster. This just makes sure that anything we have in play will be quite monstrous, especially when enchanting our commander, making it a 2-turn clock instead of 3, while also giving it Annihilator. Rogue's Passage also helps our monsters get through, ignoring any potential chump blockers. Keep in mind that Zhulodok has 4 toughness. While it's a 3-turn clock, it could very easily die in combat. This land helps with that. Forsaken Monument also gives our creatures a boost in the form of +2/+2, since all of our creatures are colorless. Not only that, but it also gains us 2 life whenever we cast a colorless spell for yet another source of life gain. However, that's not all, because it also has permanents we tap for colorless mana give us an additional colorless mana. This is some epic mana acceleration in the deck, which is something it desperately needs. I mean, the deck's already running lands like Ancient Tomb, Guildless Commons, Temple of the False God, Eldrazi Temple, and Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, along with Sol Ring, so imagine being able to tap these for yet another colorless mana. Keep in mind that the double colorless given by the last 2 lands in this list are restricted in what they can be used for. However, that extra colorless from Forsaken Monument can be used for other things since the monument doesn't double that mana already made, so the property isn't copied. It just adds an additional colorless mana, so keep that in mind. Speaking of extra mana lands, Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, Urza's Tower, and Urza's Workshop are included. While the first 3 are dependent on each other, and having all 3 of them, the last one counts all Urza's lands. That's why Urza's Factory is also included. It might seem like a pipe dream to assemble all of these, but the deck is colorless, so these are no different than any other land without an ability we can run. However, with enough digging through the deck, we can get them out. Same with lands like Cloud Post and Glimmer Post. Glimmer Post is another way of gaining life, albeit just 1 when it enters. But its inclusion is for Cloud Post to add 2 mana instead of 1. Now, while they might seem harder to pair up being 2 cards out of 99, Monument to Perfection is also included in the deck. Unfortunately, this won't get Urza's lands, but it will get these 2 locusts. Not only that, but we can also get basic lands with it, further helping us not miss any land drops. However, it can also be used to get spheres, of which the deck is running the Mycosith Gardens. This land is an absolute beast here, being able to copy any non-legendary artifact we want. We can copy protective equipment, mana accelerants, or large artifact creatures. Speaking of copying things, the deck is also running Helm of the Host, Wandering Archaic, and Deceiver of Form for copying shenanigans. Most of the creatures in the deck already benefit from being copied multiple times with the Helm, not just our commander. Although copying our commander gives our colorless 7 CMC spells quadruple cascade, which is hilarious. Wandering Archaic either taxes opponents or we copy it. All counter spells cost 2 more generic because then we can just copy the counter spell and use the copy to counter the original. However, this has been best used against green decks. Don't want to pay 5 mana for your Cultivate? Thank you, 1 waste to my hand and 1 to play. So good. Its backside could have some use depending on the case, since the deck is colorless after all, but it almost always helps other decks more, so I tend to always cast it as its creature side instead. Deceiver of Forms is another way to make the most out of our top deck manipulation effects like Sensei's Dividing Top and Scroll Rack, which are also in the deck. Imagine having something like It That Betrays on top of our library, and then having all of our other creatures beside it become a copy of it. Super brutal. Plus, it also doubles Cascades as a bonus. These top deck manipulation cards also help with somewhat cascading into what it is that we want, particularly Scroll Rack, since we can put it from our hand, helping us cast those things for free. These cards are too good here. While we saw some mana acceleration effects earlier, those aren't the only ones in the deck. We can't just rely on the double cascade from our commander to make the most of our big splashy spells. Fortunately, cost reduction is another way to maximize our mana production. Eye of Ugin, Cloud Key, Foundry Inspector, Jorah's Familiar, and Stone Calendar help with just that. Something important to note is that Eye of Ugin being a land doesn't mean that it takes up a land slot. Since it doesn't tap for land, it should be considered as a spell slot. That being said, it can also be used to tutor our library for colorless creatures, which is absolutely amazing here, even if the only creatures benefiting from the cost reduction are eldrazi. But that's fine, even though this is not necessarily an eldrazi-centered deck, our commander is an eldrazi. The option I choose for Cloud Key is usually creatures, since those are the biggest spells in the deck, but you could also choose Artifact and still make the most of it. Keep in mind that Foundry Inspector and Jorah's Familiar already reduce Artifact spells cost. The Familiar does have the added bonus of also reducing the cost of legendary permanents too. Stone Calendar is the best of these though, since it reduces the generic costs of all of our spells by 1. The Immortal Sun and Ugin the Ineffable are some more cost reduction effects, but they also have other abilities to them. The first one also pumps our creatures, draws us an additional card in our draw step, and prevents Planeswalkers from being activated. This might affect us, but not that much. The deck only has 3 Planeswalkers, so we can do without activating them. So it's just a bonus stacks effect that might slightly inconvenience us. For example, Ugin here will still give us the cost reduction effect, even if we control the Immortal Sun, because it's a static ability, not an activated ability. Speaking of which, it provides a form of card advantage even if it's slightly convoluted. And it also provides a removal effect, albeit a bit costly at 3 loyalty. Speaking of card advantage, the deck is running as many of those as it can. Mind's Eye and Endbringer are pretty decent considering that pure card advantage effects in colorless aren't that many. Especially the good ones, but that's understandable. In any case, with 3 available mana we can draw 3 cards between our turns, since we'll draw at the very least during our opponent's draw steps. Eye of Vecna is some more upkeep dependent card advantage. 2 mana and 2 life isn't that bad, especially if we've run out of steam. It also triggers when it enters the battlefield. That being said, we do have access to the best colorless card advantage card out there, the One Ring. The secondary market value of this card is pretty high though, so if you haven't already and are able to get a Lord of the Rings bundle for its original price, it already pays for the cost of the One Ring. So you get the other 3 promos as well as all of these packs for free. In any case, it also gives us protection from everything when we cast it, which is an amazing bonus. Bonder's Enclave and War Room also provide activated card advantage all on cards that don't take up slots for being mana generating lands. Best thing about War Room here is not losing life when we activate it. So good. Reliquary Tower and Thought Vessel are included to give us a limitless hand size, but in a colorless deck like this one, they're good regardless. They both tap for what we need, and the rock only costs 2 mana to cast. Even if they might seem superfluous in other decks, there's no reason not to run them here. This brew is just an idea of how to build around a Zhulodok Void Gorger. Could you go full-blown Eldrazi with it? Sure you can. But there are so many other great creatures and cards to run if you're not limiting yourself to just Eldrazi. Of course you can run the best Eldrazi though. You can also go full high CMC spells and only have a minimum amount of cards with a mana value of less than 7. So there's plenty of malleability in how you build this commander. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of the Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Bearded Kirby, and happy brewing.